So I was told that I needed to get a bigger set of balls. Well, I did. Hey folks, we're back again with another video, and today we're going to be installing a bottom bracket. So this is a new frame. It's going to need a bottom bracket, but we need to check to see if the actual shell needs to be prepped before installing it. Now this is a threaded BSA bottom bracket shell, which is my favorite solution for mountain bikes. Personally, I would never buy a mountain bike frame without a threaded bottom bracket. Why? For starters, it's been around for decades and it's proven to be an excellent solution for the masses. That's key here, the masses, people like you and me. It's easy to figure out the cause of an issue, and when you do, it's easy to solve the issue, including if the issue turns out to be the bottom bracket shell, which can't be said for other bottom bracket solutions in my opinion. For metal frames, it's the best solution out there, and I think it's an excellent solution for carbon frames as well for the masses. Though with carbon frames, they say that there is a possibility that the actual shell can debond from the frame itself. This is nothing more than a metal shell that's literally glued into the frame. I've never seen this happen. I don't know anybody that this has happened to. I have to assume that this has happened, but ultimately, again, I have to assume that the actual percentages at a global scale is on the low side. As for other BB solutions, let's start off with the ones that you should absolutely stay away from. BB30 is the first one that comes to mind, man. BB30 literally is nothing more than a cup that's actually molded into the carbon frame, and then you just press in a bearing into the frame. That was a horrible solution. Absolute crap. Actually, even worse, now that I think about it, Trek made BB90. Trek made BB90, which was literally like a BB30, but ultimately with a smaller bearing that was pressed into a frame. That's probably the worst of all. In my opinion, again, don't ever buy a frame that has a BB30 or a Trek BB90 bearing in it. They're going extinct and it's about time. Then we have press fit, which is what BB89 and BB92 for mountain bikes. Not my preference. Supposedly the thing came out to solve reliability issues with BSA. I call total BS on that. I fundamentally believe that press fit exists as a cost-cutting measure for manufacturing, in particular frame manufacturers, by not having to cut threads inside metal, which is expensive, especially at scale, guys. You got to remember, these people make 1 million frames a year. Well, maybe not IBIS, but ultimately, you have big manufacturing companies, Specialized Trek, that they make millions of frames a year around the world, right? If they could even save $1 a frame by not having to tap out threads in a shell, that's $1 million off 1 million frame saving right there, right? If it's done right, press fit will work great. There's no issues with it. The problem is, unless both the frame and the bearing shells are manufactured to tight tolerances, which in this industry is pretty much non-existent at scale, press fit can become very problematic. Fixing issues on carbon frames especially can be super complicated. Reaming and facing tools are metal-based, at least that I know of, and there's a big chance you could destroy a carbon frame with them, right? Don't use metal dies on carbon. They need to be diamond-based dies for carbon because one, it'll wear out those dies real quick, right? Carbon is actually a lot tougher than steel. Those little edges, they will dull out quick. And two, depending on how well the carbon frame was made, you could actually dig into the actual fibers in the carbon, and then you got a huge problem on your hands. If you think your carbon frame needs to be reamed or even faced and it's all carbon, then send it to a professional, or worst case scenario, send it back to the manufacturer and get a new frame under warranty. They will replace it if it's really offset. Oh, before I forget, another big issue that I have with press fit bottom brackets is with 30mm cranks, which is sort of my preference, or even dub cranks really, since the hole in it is 41mm in diameter and a 30mm crank is 30mm, a dub is like, what, a little on a tad under 29mm. That makes for really small balls inside the bearings, which, well, let's face it, they'll wear real quick, right? And that's a very common problem. So to solve this issue, they came out with PF30 and I keep on forgetting that BB386. Now PF30 was a 46mm hole where you get much bigger balls within the bearing, so technically better reliability. The issue, again, you're super dependent on tight tolerances, which, again, they basically suck in this industry. Also, the shell is stupid narrow on a PF30 or FP30, sorry. No, PF30, yes. I always mix those two up on a PF30. And you need a ton of spacers in order to match your cranks, which is just totally ridiculous in my opinion. At least with BB386, which is like a PF30, but it has a wider shell, so they solved the spacer issue with that one. But again, who cares? You're still dependent on super tight tolerances for everything to run right, which again is hard to fix for the average person if something was done wrong, in particular with the actual shell or the embedding of the shell in the frame. Now we have T47, which has my attention personally. There's an external version, which is exactly basically like BSA, but bigger, which is really nice, and an internal version, which again allows for larger axles and larger balls within larger bearings, which should be good for reliability. And also there's a larger surface area in T47 in order to bond the shell to the actual frames. So ultimately, it should help with reliability. I barely talked today, but I have no data on that. I have no idea if that will be the case. What I do know with T47 is that I was surprised to see how little space there is between the actual edge of the shell and the tool to screw it in there. You got to be real careful, man, or if the slightest slip and poof, you could hit your frame and scratch your frame real good. So take your time if you're going to be working on that. Ultimately, for mountain bikes, I still think BSA is the way to go for the masses. Is it perfect? No. But anyone can make it work perfectly easily. And that's key over here, in my opinion. Talk about a tangent. Let's go back to installing a bottom bracket, possibly prepping a frame. So let's go into the tools and the parts needed for the job. So let's start off with the actual bottom bracket itself. Now I'm going to start off by saying that I'm a huge fan of NTN bearings, right? I love NTN bearings. For the average folk, I think NTN makes the best, most precise bearings out there that take a huge beating and they last for a long time. But for this build, I'm going to go with Enduro's new Maxhit BSA 30 kit, basically. So this is like your typical threaded bottom bracket. The difference is that your average, well, all threaded bottom brackets that I know of outside of this one are a shell, and then you press a bearing into the shell. In fact, I got a video if you guys want to see how to do that, right? This one here, the shell is actually the bearing. So in other words, this is the outer race. This is the inner race. The balls go in between. The nice thing about that, you get bigger balls in there, which should mean better reliability. The other downside that I see for this besides price is that if it wears, well, I mean, you have to change the entire kit. You can't just change out the bearing at that point, right? And again, this is a pretty expensive kit. But to install a kit, at a minimum, you're going to need a tool, any 12-point tool. This is a Park Tool BB, what is 79? No, yeah, 79. Is that 79? Yep, BBT 79. Essentially goes in there, screw it in. You're going to need a torque wrench, and I highly recommend, even though not needed, I personally recommend anti-seize. Put anti-seize on the threads. Do yourselves the favor by doing that. A very cheap solution that could solve you a very big problem down the road. Now, let's say there is something wrong with the shell. Well, at that point, you would have to either tap and face the bottom bracket shell, right? Now, there's different tools for that. So on the right-hand side, I have Park Tools, what is it, BTS1, tapping on facing tool. And this tool works great. I personally like this tool. I like the fact that, you know, you have control, especially on the facing side, right? This is a tapping tool, a true tapping tool right now, right? And then I would have to remove, well, I sink these into the bottom bracket, and then I would put on the facing tool and I would face, but I won't be able to face one of the taps on this frame using Park Tools' tool. So this is Unoir's tool. Now this is not a tapping tool. This is just a facing tool, but it comes with a guide to make sure that you're even. What's the difference between a tapping tool and a facing tool? Well, if you look at the facing tool, that just has regular threads. You can't cut with these threads, right? This has flattened edges in order to seamlessly go into threads, and then it allows you to cut threads, and also it has collectors for all the metal shavings to fall into, right? This doesn't, so you can't tap with this. But this you could absolutely face with. The difference is that this is a spring-led facer. In other words, tension is based on how tight you put the spring or how much pressure you put the spring or on the spring. It has its advantages, but I sort of like the idea of just, you know, putting my own pressure, because I like doing this with light pressure when I'm facing, and it just works out better for me. All right, but that's pretty much it. Now, when you're facing or tapping, you definitely need cutting fluid. Don't tap without cutting fluid. These things are, like I said before, they're not cheap. They're expensive. Use these on carbon, you're going to destroy them. Well, you're not going to use this on carbon, but this some people use on carbon, and you will destroy this real quick if you use this on carbon, right? Ultimately, you need cutting fluid. Use cutting fluid. It'll save the tips. It'll just make the job a little bit easier, or a lot easier actually, on your tools. And if you're going to face a Sharpie, we want to mark the shell, and then we want to see how evenly we are facing it. All right. That's pretty much all that I could think of right now, man. I don't think there's anything else. I did mention a torque wrench, so we're good. Let's start working on the bottom bracket. So the first thing we're going to do is test to see if we are aligned, or how well we are aligned and how well we are threaded, right? So we're just going to grab one of our shells. Now you got to make sure you grab the right bottom bracket side, right? So on it, it will definitely say this is left and this one is right. So in both cases, you're going to screw in to tighten towards the back and to loosen towards the front. So you want to install screwing towards the back and remove towards the front, because it's going to be backwards. These are mirror images, right? This is a left-hand turn. This is going to be a right-hand turn, basically, right? So drive hand, left-hand turn, non-drive side, right-hand turn to tighten, and the reverse to screw in, right? So I got the left over here, and I'm just going to try this by hand, right? So first go the opposite until you hear a click. When you hear a click, actually, sorry, my bad. Get the right one for the right side in this case for the bottom bracket, right? So now we're going to go backwards to hear a click, and then we're just going to screw it towards the left. And this one's going in real easy, actually. This one's going in super easy. And you should feel a little resistance. If you feel a lot of resistance, then there's a chance that those threads just need to be tweaked. And we'll get into that in a second. But let me just test the other side since I'm here. See if I could do this side by hand. Oh yeah, both of them went in super easy by hand. So next, what we want to see is how aligned are we? For that, we're going to need a crank. Take your crank, put it in. Now, it's going to stick in certain areas because it's real tight against the inner race over there, but ultimately, with your fingers, very lightly, you should be able to push it all the way through, right? If you can't push it all the way through, in fact, that goes through real easy. If you have difficulties, or if you're having to put some kind of force to go all the way through, then that means that the shell could use a facing on each side in order to make them parallel to each other. And another sign that they're not parallel to each other, you're going to start seeing lines as you're using your cranks. You're going to see lines on the crank. That's telling you that it's slightly up, and ultimately it's digging into the crank axle over here, right? So in this case, it goes on real easy. I have absolutely no issues. I feel no rub, right? But I'm going to show you guys exactly how these tools work just in case. But again, in my case, technically, I don't want to tap this. I mean, I'm going to do it to show you guys, but I don't want to face this, right? It's more than good enough to install a bottom bracket on it without any issue, right? And I'll tighten this a little too hard by hand. So again, forward to remove it. The reality is, again, if I tap this thing, every time you tap, you are technically going to eat threads, and you have the potential of creating a little bit too much slop between your threads. So unless you absolutely have to tap it, again, you know you're going to have to tap it. If you take your bottom bracket, you try and put it in by hand, and it's just not going in right by hand. It's being, oops, I'm going the wrong way. It's, do I even have the right one? Yeah, I do. It's being real stubborn or real stiff, or it's sort of like it needs in the middle. You got to put pressure to turn it a little bit more. That's just telling you that the threads just need to be tidied up, right? You're not retapping the whole thing from scratch. You're just tidying up the threads, okay? So let's go into that first. So let's say we wanted to tap this thing, right? We have our tapping tool. Now, you got to be very careful when it comes to the actual taps. They are marked on them as far as which side they belong to, but on it, it doesn't mark the actual side. It's actually telling you the threading, if it's a left-hand thread or a right-hand thread. Now again, the drive side is a left-hand thread. We're turning left in order to be able to tighten. The non-drive side is a right-hand thread in order to be able to tighten. I highly recommend you don't buy this tool personally. Go to your local bike shop if you need a tap. Don't buy this tool. It's a very expensive tool, but just in case you decide to buy the tool because you want to get into this and help people around your area, or even, you know, just have a side job, then again, the tool has markers on it. So over here it says RH, right hand threaded, right? So that's telling me that's for the non-drive side. This is the left hand threaded. So that's telling me this is for the drive side. Now, if you're going to use this tool, you never want to take a tapping tool on a bottom bracket and install one side at a time. You take a big chance on stripping that first thread when you do that, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to put it in and you're going to connect them together. You do not want to damage that first thread. Very important. So I got them connected. Now I'm putting them together. I'm aligned on both sides, right? Let's go a little bit backwards, and then we're going to slowly, and don't force, go forward. And you will see they will go in. And you always want to stay consistent. Now in this case, I guarantee you that I'm not going to run into any issues. But if you find it starts getting hard, what you're going to want to do, and you got to put oil on it too, right? What you're going to want, don't forget the oil. Make sure you always put oil. I should have mentioned that before I put them in there. Put oil on the actual dies, right? And on the threads inside. What you're going to want to do is tighten and then loosen a bit. You want that extra metal to collect inside those spaces, these little wells over here, right? So then you tighten and you loosen a bit, tighten and loosen. And basically, you can do that until you bottom out. Now, I know for a fact with this bottom bracket, not that I tested it, but just from looking at the bottom bracket inside, I won't be able to bottom out on one side and sink the entire die on this side, I bet you, without the die sticking out, because this particular bottom bracket has a support spacer in the middle of it, which is going to stop me. So we're just going to go all the way down. See, that went flawless, right? There's no issues over there. So I'm ended on this side, and I was right. On this side, you can't see it, but on this side, it's actually sticking out. Where on this side, if you're going to face, if you decide to face and you want to face with this tool, you've got to, let me take out the tool. You've got to sink the die inside the shell in order to be able to face the outside. You don't want to touch the die when you're facing, right? But we're not going to face with this tool. I'm going to put this back in there because I can't face with, well, I can only face this side with this tool. I can't face the other side. All right, so now when it comes to taking it out, we want to go towards the front of the bike, and you want to do it as evenly as possible. So let me make sure the threads are even. Make sure the threads are even on each side as evenly as possible, right? And then when it comes to the end, do not take one side out on its own. My throat's going. All right, let me get there, getting closer. What you want to do is take them both out essentially evenly, right? So we're getting close to the end. Do not just take one side out. All right. I don't know how well you can see this. So I'm nearly at the end, and essentially, there we go. I got the other side, and you pop them out together at the end of it all. And that's pretty much it. So that's how you would tap a BSA bottom bracket. Super easy. Now, why I like tapping BSA better than reaming press fit, with BSA, if you can't tap, if these things are really that bad when you buy a new frame, get a new frame through warranty. When it comes to facing, we have guides that make sure that we are straight after we tapped, and then we could face perfectly parallel. The problem with press fit is, sure, you could ream the inner cup, but it could very well be that that inner cup is offset in some other direction. So that means that the reamer will never be able to fully make sure it's 100% parallel to the other side from a reaming perspective, because you're going to have to take off, let's say, a little bit of extra corner on this side, for instance. So it takes some expertise. right? Whereas opposed to this, you can't miss with this. You got the threads, you're just tidying up the threads. That's all you're doing, right? So next, let's get into facing. So when it comes to facing, I can't use the Park Tool facer because that BTS1, I can't, on the non-drive side, I can't fully sink in the die because that little metal sleeve that's in it. And well, the die touches it and it ends up sticking out, right? So that's where I'm going to go to my U-Noir facing tool, right? Now again, this isn't a tap, this is a guide. And again, it gives us sides, BSA right, BSA left. So this one, it says left, which is actually left-hand threaded, not left side of the bike, right? So if I put it in, now I should be able to just screw it in by hand. Should freely go in with this one. Again, this one won't tap. This, we're just screwing it in as a guide. But again, we got to sink them. We got to make sure they are completely sunk so we don't touch them. All right. So if it starts getting a little bit hard to grip with your hands, they give you a tool. Put the tool. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. I'm looking at this backwards. Let's take the tool and we are going to screw it in until we are sunk on one side. So there we go. That's pretty sunk. Not sunk by a lot. Let's say a millimeter. It's not like we're going to be cutting off a lot of metal over here, right? Okay. And now I'm sunk on that side. Okay. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a Sharpie and I'm going to mark the whole face. And we're going to use that as a guide as far as how even we are. I'm going to grab my tool. Probably should have prepped this before that. I'm going to take out this entire stack. I'm going to put this in, and the tap, the facer is going to touch the end, right? I'm going to bring it right to the end. And then we're going to install the way we took it off. We're going to put everything back on this side. Spring. And ultimately, hopefully, I can spin this around where you can see it. Now, what we're going to do over here, I don't know how you guys could see this. Yeah, let me see if I can spin this around. Yeah, I can spin it around. So basically what we're going to do right now, could you see that? Yes, you can. So now I'm going to screw this all the way in, and I'm just going to put a touch of tension. I don't want to put a lot of tension. I don't like doing this with a lot of tension. First, I just want to test, right? And all we're trying to do is put some pressure using the spring onto the whole mechanism, onto the whole tool, in order to compress it, to get the teeth to touch, right? So I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure on it. So I got a little bit of pressure, right? Now I'm going to turn this, right, with a little bit of pressure, and I want to see and we're taking off just little flakes over here and do it very lightly, and then you don't want to press down hard, right? You want to press in, turn, and then lightly back off so you don't create any teeth marks in the actual bottom bracket or in the face, right? So now the only way you could test is the issue as far as how much you've done or where you're at is by taking off the tool. That's the only unfortunate part. Now, for you to see it, I got to take off the whole tool. But ultimately, you could tell just by looking at what I just did, this is all flat, and I only have this little area over here that didn't come off. So that tells me that this is flat. I don't need to do anymore. It's pointless. This will not affect it. In other words, when I screwed down the bottom bracket, it's going to sit perfectly on it. And I didn't remove anything essentially. This was already perfectly set flat, right? So I'm a happy camper with that. So now I'm going to do it to the other side, and I will be back. So now I know that both sides are perfectly parallel to each other and my threads are nicely tapped. So now I'm going to take out again, I'm looking the wrong way. I'm going to take out the guides. These here, we don't care if we take them out one side at a time because again, they're not tapping anything. When it comes to taps, make sure you do it as evenly as possible on both sides. All right, grab some alcohol, spray them down on both sides. Clean it all out real good. Any oil that you put on your taps, For your facing tool, make sure you get it all out of there. Okay. To this side. And you only have to do this once, guys. I forgot to mention that. You'll never have to do this again. If you do, it's because you destroyed something. So this is only a one-time deal. That's why I say don't buy these tools. They're too expensive unless you do it for multiple people or you're a group of guys that pitch the money in together, all right? Now we put in our bottom bracket. Before we install the bottom bracket, we want to be 100% sure we know the width of the shell in the frame. Now, typically for mountain bikes, there's two sizes when it comes to BNA, 68 millimeter wide and 73 millimeter wide, right? The best way to measure it, grab a caliper, and we're just literally measuring from edge to edge. And again, this is to verify to see how many spacers we are going to need for the bottom bracket itself. So this one's 73 millimeters, even though it says 73.3. That's just from taking it off unevenly. Now, if you notice over here, I have a protrusion basically, right? This is so I could put, what are they, ISCG mount. It's an adapter that allows me to put a chain guide. So if we measure that, that's going to be 2 or 3 millimeters, I forget. So ultimately, that is 2 millimeters in depth, all right? So on a 68 millimeter width shell, you will typically need 2 spacers on the inside of the actual bottom bracket cup on each side. On a 73 millimeter, you'll typically need 1 spacer on the drive side only. You don't need a spacer typically on the non-drive side, right? But I plan on using one of these adapters again so I can mount a chain guide. I like chain guides, and this mount is in total a little less than 5 millimeters. So ultimately, they give us the spacer built into the mount. So the adapter is going to eat up this space on the edge over here, and I'm in a weird position over here. Am I right? Nope. Where am I? There I am, right? So, and it's going to provide us the spacer needed that we would put on this side, on the inside of the drive side shell, or cup, I should say, right? So next, what we do is we grab our cup. We make sure we grab the left one. So, I mean the right one. So by right, I mean like the appropriate one. So this is left. This would go on the non-drive side. This is right. This would go on the drive side. So unlike the tools, when they say R, it literally is to the right side of the bike, which is drive side. If it's L, it's the left side of the bike, which is non-drive side, whereas the tapping tools and the facing tools, when they say R, it's right threaded, and the tapping tools when it says, and facing tools when it says left, L, it's left threaded, meaning L goes on the drive side. So it's like backwards. This whole industry is completely confusing. Now, before we put this thing in, I can't recommend enough using anti-seize. This is cheap insurance, guys. This could solve you a lot of headaches down the road, especially if you live in certain environments that are humid or just in general not friendly with different metals connecting with each other, and it doesn't take all that much. The stuff is great. What you do is you just put it on the thread. Just be careful with it because it does make a mess. This stuff surprisingly makes a huge mess. Spread it across the threads, right? Make sure you're covered. Just like that. And this will go a long way. So then we put this guy in, and again, to tighten him towards the back. Make sure this guy doesn't pop out. Make sure he's sitting in his place. All right. There we go. Next, we torque him. As for torque specs, it says on the cup itself, 35 to 50 newton meters. Typically, I do 40 newton meters. I'm going to go in between and do 43 newton meters, right? So you could do 50 newton meters if it makes you feel more comfortable. I think that's too much personally. So since I set it to 43 newton meters, we're going to take them, and there we go. 43 newton meters. Drive side's done. Let me do the non-drive side. I'm not going to record it. and I will be back. So we have both bottom bracket cups installed. Now we're going to give it one final test. We grab our crank and it should be able to go through without any resistance outside of the resistance of the inner race, right? Because it is pretty tight tolerance. And we're going to put it through and boom. You shouldn't feel any major knocking. It should just slip right through. If you feel like some kind of clicking before it goes through and you haven't faced your frame, then it's quite possible your frame just needs a facing, right? But this one goes straight through, no issues at all. Love it. That's how it should be. So again, why I like BSA threaded bottom brackets for mountain bikes, mind you, it's just very easy to service for the average person. Anybody could service this. It's real simple. If the shell is in such bad shape from manufacturing, then call up the manufacturer and say, hey, you guys messed up in manufacturing with this frame. Any reputable manufacturer will replace the frame, all right? Same goes for press fit, guys. Not like I really have anything against press fit. When press fit is manufactured right and installed right, it works great. You're not going to have any issues with it. But the reality is the dependencies on tolerance with press fit between the frame manufacturers, the BB manufacturers, it's just too high of a risk that something's not going to be done right. Hence why press fit has more squeaks, especially with mountain bikes, even road bikes, but ultimately with mountain bikes. I've seen way more issues with creaks on press fit than I've ever seen with BSA. And whenever I've come across one with BSA, it was easy to fix it, and press fit is not, right? It can be complex if it's the actual shell, because tapping is easy, facing is easy. With press fit, facing is just as easy, but reaming, that could be complex depending on what the problem is, all right? That's excluding if the issue is actually the cups. That would be in both cases, BSA and press fit. You'd have to go to whoever made the cups, the bottom bracket itself, and say, hey, give me a replacement, right? So I don't want to sit here and bash press fit. I just think for the masses, again, you and me, BSA is just a much easier solution to work on and fix a problem. So is there anything else? There probably is, guys, but ultimately, I mean, this video is already long enough, I think. I'm sure I might have missed a couple of things. If I did, just ask in the comment section below. I'll do my best to try and answer them as quick as I can, although I have been pretty busy lately, so there might be some delays, all right? Hopefully this video was helpful to some of you. If it was, please give it a thumbs up, man. Click that like button. Click the subscribe button if you want to see more videos. Click the bell button, if you want to get notified when new videos get released, and more videos are coming, all right? Until then, hope all is well with all of you, and we will be talking to you soon. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.